You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV from Toronto, Ontario. Assalamu alaikum and greetings of peace. I'm Catherine Bullock. Activists are saying that the climate change summit going on in Egypt is being greenwashed. We will talk to the Egyptian-Canadian Coalition for Democracy later on in the show, but first some news headlines. Mother says Fed's doing nothing to help her captive son. School board's new dress guidelines racist, say advocates. New Calgary Islamic school to enrol more than 500 students. Australian Muslim students forced to view racist cartoon. And now the details. Sally Lane, the mother of a Canadian man being held in northeastern Syria, said yesterday that the federal government is doing, quote, precisely nothing to help him with his release. Lane urged the Liberal government to send help so that her son Jack Letts and other Canadians could be freed from Kurdish-run detention camps in Syria. Lane's demand was supported by Green Party MP Elizabeth May and Alex Neve, former Secretary-General of Amnesty International Canada. His family says Letts was not part of ISIS, but was captured by Kurdish forces as he was fleeing Syria with refugees in 2017. The Thames Valley District School Board, the largest southwestern Ontario school board, is facing criticism for its new guidelines outlining a dress code for students. Among the updated guidelines, the board uses a Free Palestine t-shirt as an example of a divisive political slogan on clothing or headwear that could promote or incite violence. Following complaints from the community, the board has removed the guideline and apologized for the harm. The president of Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East says this is a perfect example of the racism Palestinians still face in Canada. A Muslim charity is set to build Green Dome Islamic School on a 2-hectare lot in Calgary, Alberta. The school will enroll more than 500 students. The complex will also house a mosque, banquet and conference hall, and office space. The school will follow the Alberta education curriculum with optional courses in Islamic and Quran studies and aims to be an inclusive school open to all. The project is one of North America's largest undertakings by a Muslim charity. At a projected cost of $45 to $50 million, with money coming from community donations. It is set to be completed by the fall of 2024. A student in Melbourne, Australia, was the victim of Islamophobia when her media teacher forced students in her class to look at an offensive cartoon of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. 11th grader Sarah Ammar says all her classmates were speechless. Several other Muslim students were also present in the class. Although she expressed discomfort with the cartoons, her teacher did not let her leave the classroom. The teacher allegedly talked about how Muslims killed an innocent person who created the cartoon. Ammar's father has demanded that the teacher be suspended and a formal apology from the school. Authorities have contacted him about the incident. And that's it for the news. The Egyptian-Canadian Coalition for Democracy has released a statement entitled Greenwashing. Egypt and COP do not go together. They are referring to the United Nations Conference on Climate Change, otherwise known as COP27, that opened on November 6 in Sharm el-Sheikh, an isolated luxury resort by the Red Sea. To discuss their concerns, we are joined by Brother Ehab Lotayef, board member, Egyptian-Canadian Coalition for Democracy. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to the show.
Wa alaikum salam.
You've given the title of your statement a very interesting word, greenwashing. Can you please tell us what you mean by that?
I mean that the Egyptian government is trying to use a false premise of being environmentally concerned to hide its human rights record and its failure on so many fronts.
We've heard that the delegates have been having very sort of weird problems like lack of food on the site and lack of water and air conditions set to sort of like freezing temperatures in contrast to the warmth outside. Have you been in touch with any of the delegates about the situation?
No, not directly, but I hear the news, and I can say that the big problem here, a second problem, not related to what we wrote, is the fact that Egypt, the Egyptian government, is a very bureaucratic system and very inefficient in organizing anything whatsoever. So that doesn't surprise me in any way.
The United Nations probably had some kind of process that I haven't looked into, but why would they choose Egypt, which we know is going through authoritarian reaction to the Arab Spring, as it's called? Why do you think they would have chosen Egypt as a site?
It is not that countries line up to host these kind of conferences or any conferences really. There is always a challenge to find a good host. Plus, I think that the United Nations tries to give the impression of diversity when they are assigning hosting. They wanted this to have more relation to the global south. And Egypt, I believe, put its name in right away as a chance to wash out or hide its human rights record and its failure on the international level, and to show that it's still a power in the region, which really, unfortunately, it is not anymore.
Mm. If someone was going to host a conference on climate change, you'd expect their society and their policies in general to be focused towards, greening electricity or actual implementation. And are you trying to, by this use of the word greenwashing, say that Egypt isn't really doing much to address climate change, but they're just pretending for the sake of the summit?
Yes, I mean, we're using the word greenwashing in the way that whitewashing is used or sports washing is used by using the greening impression to cover up the worst that's under the surface. I have to say that unfortunately for Egypt, that the holding this conference there attracted a lot of attention, much more than usual, to the human rights record in Egypt. So the greenwashing did not work. And another aspect of your question, actually, is Egypt showing any real environmental initiatives? None whatsoever. Is it showing respect to the environment or trying? I think that's very low on their priorities.
We know that there's a British Egyptian who's been in jail off and on for the better part of the last decade, Alaa Abdel Fattah, who has been on a hunger strike for the last 7 months and now refused water to sort of like commemorate the start of the summit in protest of the condition, the deteriorating human rights condition in Egypt. But I wonder if you could make for us the connection. Let's say, a delegate has gone there. I want to talk about climate, electricity, coal. I don't want to talk about human rights. Can you make for us the connection?
Well, I think the connection is that as human rights people who attended the conference, like the head of Amnesty International, the head of Human Rights Watch, they went to the conference and they said that, like, the environment is a human right, but we cannot split it from any other human rights. And we want to give as much attention to how we live in this world, in addition to will we live in this world or not.
I wonder if you can just unpack or expand that a little. The environment is a human right. That's a very interesting phrase. Can you just explain that a little more?
Well, the environment is a human right from the aspect that we cannot live comfortably, and comfortably, I don't mean luxury, I mean the minimum comfort for you. If the environment is deteriorating, if you don't know if your coastal city that you're living in will exist in 20 years or not, when you have rains like what Pakistan had in the last month, when these things are happening sporadically, but more regularly, when we had temperatures here in Canada a summer ago that reached 40 degrees, in areas which didn't have that. This is basic life needs, and when this changes this way, it's a right for people to live in a more stable situation. And as long as we are burning fossil fuels and as we are not paying attention to these issues, it is just we'll lose these rights, and the norm will become that people are living for today in expectation of just inshallah things will stay, will not deteriorate. This is not a life that people should be living.
The Egyptian authorities apparently gave delegates an app, which then it was invading their privacy, looking at their emails and having access to all kinds of things. And I wonder, so the spotlighting on human rights that the delegates are doing while they're there at the climate change conference, do you think it's going to have an impact on Egypt?
We don't know anymore what's going to have an impact on Egypt. I'm being very sincere that we as human rights activists, as involved in the issue of democracy in Egypt, we just do what we can and push as much as we can. Egypt is buying its way through buying arms from European powers, through selling out its assets, just to remain accepted in the international world. And as long as the so-called Western democracies don't really play a role in calling Egypt for what it does, the internal dynamics in Egypt are totally tilted towards the army power, and it is very difficult to see a civil society movement in Egypt that will be listened to. So the real hope for the Egyptian people at this point, unfortunately, I'm not happy to say that, but is international pressure.
And do you think Egypt's been surprised by all the delegates who want to come there and spotlight their record? I mentioned the app because I was trying to highlight the fact that they're obviously doing repression and surveillance even on the delegates, but it doesn't look like it's working. So do you think they're a bit surprised?
I think they are surprised. I think they don't calculate everything carefully. And I think that the delegates are coming. I mean, again, environmental activists, who are a lot of the delegates there, are used to being in the minority in their own countries. I mean, I know them here in Canada. I work with them. So they're not the kind that will be quiet. And those who went particularly to talk about human rights are also not to be quiet. The Egyptians don't know what they got themselves into, because as I mentioned, or as I will mention, the focus on the deteriorating human rights situation in Egypt during this conference has been much larger than it has been for years.
Well, unfortunately, there's a lot more to talk about, but we're out of time. Thank you very much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. If you like what we do, please share, like, and subscribe. Stay safe and God bless.